A wound that never heals. The price of guilt in a family continued. Growing up, I knew my father had been through more than he let on. The few stories he shared about his time during the war were vague, often ending with a deep sigh and silence. He wasn't the type to glorify his service, nor was he the kind to discuss his feelings. But there were moments when I could see the weight of it all in his eyes. Moments where his stare lingered too long on nothing, as though the ghosts of the past were dancing just outside of our view. He didn't talk about the battlefields, the blood, or the loss, but every now and then, in rare moments when the air felt too thick, he'd offer small glimpses. One winter evening, as we sat by the fireplace, he mentioned a man, a friend, who didn't make it home. I was too young to understand the gravity of what he was sharing, but I could feel the depth of his pain. It wasn't the kind of grief that comes with tears. It was the kind that sinks deep into your bones and stays there, quietly gnawing away at your spirit. This stoicism, this quiet endurance, became a hallmark of my father's character, and perhaps a curse. He never wanted to burden us with his pain, and in doing so, he inadvertently made it harder for us to understand him. I think my mother struggled with this the most. She wanted to help him heal, to pull him out of the darkness, but he was unreachable, lost in memories that he wasn't willing to share. Over time, this distance between them grew. My mother, once vibrant and full of life, started to wither under the weight of her own unspoken frustrations. She never said it out loud, but I knew she blamed herself for not being able to save him from the past. And maybe that's why, after he fell ill, her anger shifted to me. I became the physical representation of all the things she couldn't control. The night my father fell was like any other. I was up late, studying for a midterm. My room was close to my parents', and I could hear the usual sounds of the house settling, the creak of floorboards, the rustling of the wind against the windows. Around midnight, I heard a thud. At first, I didn't think much of it. My father often had trouble sleeping, and it wasn't uncommon to hear him moving around late at night. But something about that sound felt different. It was heavier, more final. I paused, listening intently for any follow-up noise, but the house felt eerily silent. For a moment, I thought about getting up to check on him, but the thought slipped away as quickly as it came. I was tired, and I had an early class the next day. I convinced myself that it was nothing. The next morning, I found him on the floor, his body crumpled in a way that no one should ever see their parent. The sight of him, vulnerable and weak, sent a shockwave through me. I screamed for my mother, and together we rushed him to the hospital. But the damage had been done. The fall had triggered a series of complications that his already frail body couldn't handle. He never fully recovered after that night, and neither did our family. In the weeks that followed, my mother's grief morphed into something darker. She didn't say it at first, but I could feel her resentment growing, like a shadow creeping up the walls. I tried to be there for her, to help with the house and the visits to the hospital, but no matter what I did, it was never enough. One evening, after another long day of watching my father's health decline, she finally said what had been festering inside her for weeks. "You should have heard him," she whispered, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You should have gotten up." Her words hit me like a slap across the face. I knew she was grieving, and I tried to remind myself that people say things they don't mean when they're in pain. But part of me wondered if she really believed it. Did she think I was responsible for his fall? That I could have saved him if I'd just gotten out of bed a little earlier? The guilt settled over me like a heavy fog. I replayed that night over and over in my head, wishing I had done something, anything, differently. I started waking up in the middle of the night, haunted by the sound of the fall, imagining that I was hearing it all over again. But no matter how many times I relived it, there was no changing the past. When it came time to leave for college, part of me felt relief. I needed space. I needed to get away from the suffocating atmosphere of blame that had overtaken our home. But another part of me felt like I was abandoning my father in his final days. I hated that I couldn't be in two places at once, physically in the world of academia, but mentally and emotionally still tethered to my family's unraveling. College was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to build a new identity away from the guilt and the pain. But it wasn't that simple. The guilt followed me like a shadow, lurking in the back of my mind. no matter how hard I tried to outrun it. I threw myself into my studies, juggling multiple jobs to stay busy, to distract myself from the gnawing feeling that I didn't deserve this new life. In one of my philosophy classes, we were discussing the concept of guilt and moral responsibility. The professor posed a question to the class. Are we morally responsible for things that are beyond our control? It was meant to spark a debate, but for me, it felt like a personal attack. The question echoed in my mind for days. Was I responsible for what happened to my father? Or was it just an unfortunate accident? Something that no one could have predicted or prevented? I wanted to believe the latter, but my mother's voice, her accusation, played on a loop in my head. And it wasn't just her. Deep down, I blamed myself too. While I was wrestling with my own guilt, I came across a story that felt eerily similar to mine. It was about a man named David who had lost his mother when he was young. She had been ill for a long time, and one day, when she called out for him, he didn't come right away. By the time he reached her, it was too late. She had passed in her sleep. David spent years blaming himself, convinced that if he had just come to her sooner, he could have saved her. The guilt consumed him, affecting his relationships, his career, and his mental health. It wasn't until decades later, in therapy, that he began to understand that his mother's death wasn't his fault. It was just her time. Hearing David's story made me reflect on my own situation. Was I, like him, holding on to guilt that wasn't really mine to carry? Was I letting it ruin my life, my potential, and my ability to form meaningful connections with others? Around this time, I reconnected with an old family friend who had known my father during his service years. She was a kind woman, with a gentle voice that made you feel like you were safe just being in her presence. Over tea one afternoon, I opened up to her about my father's fall, my mother's blame, and the overwhelming guilt that had taken root in my heart. She listened quietly, nodding every now and then, letting me pour out everything I had been holding inside for so long. When I finished, she took a deep breath and said something that would stick with me forever. Your father was a strong man, but he was also deeply troubled. He carried a lot of pain from the war, and I think part of him was ready to go. His fall, it wasn't your fault. It was just one of those things that happens in life. And I think, in a way, he would want you to let go of this guilt. It's not serving you. Her words were like a balm on an old wound. For the first time in years, I felt a tiny sliver of relief. Maybe she was right. Maybe my father, wherever he was, would want me to move on, to live my life without the weight of his death hanging over me. Over the next few months, I started to see a therapist who helped me work through my guilt and the complicated emotions surrounding my family. We talked a lot about the concept of forgiveness, not just forgiving others, but forgiving yourself. I realized that in order to truly heal, I needed to forgive myself for not being perfect, for not being able to save my father, for not being able to fix my mother's grief. It wasn't an easy process. There were days when the guilt felt too heavy, when I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed my family. But slowly, over time, I began to feel lighter. I started to accept that what happened to my father wasn't my fault, and that holding on to this guilt wasn't going to bring him back. As I worked through my own healing, I began to see my mother in a new light. Her anger, her blame. It wasn't really about me. It was about her own grief, her own feelings of helplessness. She had lost the man she loved, and in the chaos of that loss, she had latched onto the only thing she could control, me. In therapy, I learned that family relationships are fragile, especially when trauma is involved. The people we love can become the targets of our pain, even when they don't deserve it. And sometimes, the hardest thing to do is to forgive those who hurt us, not because they're right, but because holding on to that hurt only damages us further. As the years passed, I began to carve out a life that was truly mine. I stayed in touch with my mother, but our relationship was never quite the same. We had both changed too much, and there were wounds that time couldn't fully heal. But I no longer blamed myself for what happened. I no longer carried the weight of her expectations or her grief. I learned that while we can't always control how others perceive us, we can control how we perceive ourselves. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The weight of favoritism, a journey of healing and resilience. Growing up, I often felt like a ghost in my own home. My name is Danny, And my story begins in a small town that seemed picturesque from the outside, but harbored the shadows of favoritism within. My parents, Janet and Mark, were hardworking individuals who had dreams for their children, but those dreams were tightly woven into the fabric of their preferences. It was painfully clear from a young age that my older brother, Alex, was their golden child. The stark differences in how they treated us were evident in everything: birthdays, school achievements, even casual conversations at the dinner table. As I sat across from my parents, my heart would sink when they praised Alex for his latest sports victory while I quietly contemplated my own achievements in academics. On the surface, our family looked ordinary, but the subtle rift between us was more pronounced than any outward family dynamic. I vividly remember my 10th birthday, a day that should have been filled with joy. My parents decided to throw me a party, but the theme revolved around superheroes, which was Alex's obsession. My love for dinosaurs was overshadowed as I watched Alex receive a mountain of presents while I unwrapped a single, second-hand toy. The laughter of his friends rang in my ears, drowning out my excitement and leaving me feeling unworthy and invisible. As we progressed into our teenage years, the impact of favoritism only intensified. Alex thrived socially and athletically, often the center of attention. I, on the other hand, became an easy target for bullying at school. My passion for reading and my introverted nature set me apart, and I remember the first time a classmate cruelly labeled me the nerd. The laughter of my peers echoed in the hallways, serving as a constant reminder of my loneliness. One particular incident remains etched in my memory, a talent show performance I had prepared for months. I poured my heart into a poem about resilience and self-acceptance, only to look out into the audience and see Alex, flanked by his friends, smirking at me. Their disdain struck me like a physical blow. I stumbled over my words, the audience's laughter turning from appreciative to mocking. The embarrassment stung. But what hurt the most was the realization that the support I had hoped for from my family was non-existent. My parents were absent, engrossed in their social lives, unaware of the turmoil I was facing. Despite the relentless favoritism, I resolved to carve my own path. I worked diligently in school, earning a scholarship to study computer science at a reputable university. The effort it took felt monumental, especially as I watched Alex glide through life, always backed by our parents' unwavering support. They showered him with gifts, while I scrimped and saved to make ends meet. The stark contrast became a source of bitterness, but I buried it deep, convincing myself that I would prove my worth through hard work. At university, I encountered a diverse group of friends who became my chosen family. They celebrated my achievements and encouraged me to pursue my passions without fear of judgment. I blossomed in this new environment, and for the first time, I felt seen. Yet, the scars of my childhood remained. Whenever I achieved something significant, I could still hear the echoes of my parents' voices praising Alex, leaving me feeling inadequate even in moments of triumph. The day I came out as gay at the age of 22 became a turning point in my life, but not in the way I had hoped. I had imagined a supportive family embracing me, but what I received was silence. My parents reacted with shock and disappointment, their faces reflecting a mix of confusion and denial. Alex, who I had hoped might understand, chose to mock me instead, using my vulnerability as a weapon. The confrontation left me shattered. The very people I longed for acceptance from turned their backs, choosing ignorance over love. I was thrust into a state of despair, grappling with the harsh reality that the love I craved might never be granted. During this time, I leaned heavily on my chosen family, finding solace in their acceptance and understanding. They embraced my identity, helping me navigate the challenges of self-acceptance. Amidst the turmoil of my family, my grandparents became my sanctuary. They recognized the imbalance in our family dynamics and offered unconditional love. Their home was filled with warmth, laughter, and the kind of acceptance I had always yearned for. I remember sitting on their porch, sipping sweet tea as they shared stories from their youth, making me feel valued and cherished. However, their sudden passing left a void that was unbearable. The grief was compounded by the realization that I had lost the only source of unconditional love in my life. At their funeral, I felt a mix of sorrow and regret, lamenting the love that had been withheld from me by my own parents. Yet, it was at this moment of loss that I discovered a life-altering truth. In the midst of grief, I learned that my grandparents had left me their house and a substantial inheritance of $500,000. This unexpected turn of events stirred conflicting emotions within me, especially as I observed my parents' faces light up at the prospect of Alex receiving a fortune they believed would come to him. Their excitement was palpable, reminiscent of how they had always prioritized Alex's needs over mine. The twist in the inheritance revealed a cruel irony. My grandparents had hidden a clause in their will that left Alex with nothing but monopoly money. When he discovered this, the facade of confidence crumbled, leaving him exposed and desperate. The moment he arrived at my doorstep, seeking help, was both surreal and jarring. This was the brother who had tormented me throughout our childhood, now reduced to pleading for support. As Alex stood at my door, his eyes reflecting vulnerability, I faced a moral dilemma. Should I help the very brother who had caused me so much pain? His story of rejection by our parents was tinged with irony, as he expressed surprise at their abandonment, unaware of the consequences of his past actions. In that moment, I grappled with the conflicting emotions of sympathy and resentment. I found myself reflecting on the years of emotional neglect and bullying I had endured. Memories flooded my mind. His sneers during my performances, the way he had never stood up for me against bullies, and the countless times he had undermined my achievements. Despite the anger that bubbled within me, I recognized the importance of healing. I realized that holding on to bitterness would only weigh me down further. After some days of contemplation, I decided to respond with kindness, but set firm boundaries. I crafted a message devoid of bitterness, saying, "I hope you find the help you need." It was a simple yet powerful statement, a reflection of my own growth. I understood that true kindness does not require sacrificing my well-being for the sake of others. In that moment, I chose to prioritize my healing over familial obligations. In the days following our encounter, my parents reached out, urging me to help Alex. Their desperation was palpable, reflecting the familiar patterns of favoritism and manipulation. They wanted to alleviate their own guilt without considering the emotional toll it would take on me. I realized then that my decision would not just impact Alex. It would shape my own narrative of healing and resilience. I took a step back and assessed my own journey. I was no longer the ghost living in the shadows of favoritism. I had emerged as a person with my own identity and worth. I dedicated my time to pursuing my passions, focusing on my career in computer science. The validation I had long sought from my family was no longer necessary. Instead, I surrounded myself with friends who lifted me, helping me embrace my true self. As I continued my journey, I sought therapy to process my experiences and learn how to set healthy boundaries. My therapist encouraged me to reflect on my upbringing and understand the patterns of favoritism that had shaped my relationships. This process was challenging but transformative, allowing me to reclaim my narrative and embrace my identity fully. In therapy, I learned the importance of breaking the cycle of favoritism. I began to understand that my worth was not determined by my parents' approval. I was deserving of love and acceptance, regardless of their biases. Each session brought clarity, helping me navigate the complexities of my emotions. Eventually, I found the courage to confront my parents about the impact of their favoritism. I expressed my feelings openly, sharing how their actions had shaped my self-worth and affected my relationship with Alex. Their reactions were mixed. My father showed signs of remorse, while my mother clung to her defense mechanisms. Despite their varying responses, I felt liberated. No longer burdened by the need for their approval, I was ready to create a new narrative for myself. I embraced the love and support I had found in my chosen family and began to cultivate meaningful connections with others. In time, I learned to appreciate the lessons embedded in my experiences. The scars of favoritism became a testament to my resilience. I realized that my journey was not solely about overcoming the pain inflicted by others. It was also about embracing my own identity and learning to love myself. As I navigated this new phase of my life, I also began to form new friendships and relationships. I met Liam, a kind-hearted soul who shared my passion for technology and creativity. Our bond deepened as we spent time exploring our interests and supporting each other's dreams. Liam's unwavering support offered me a glimpse of the healthy relationships I had longed for. Through our conversations, I began to understand the importance of vulnerability. Sharing my experiences with Liam was a healing process. He listened without judgment, encouraging me to embrace my past while looking forward to a brighter future. Together, we embarked on new adventures, creating memories that filled the void left by my family's indifference. As time passed, my chosen family expanded. I began to foster deeper connections with those around me, creating a network of support that replaced the love I had yearned for from my parents. I discovered the beauty of friendship, people who genuinely cared for me and celebrated my achievements without conditions. Each gathering with my friends was a reminder that family is not solely defined by blood. We shared laughter, tears, and unfiltered conversations, building a sense of belonging that had eluded me for so long. The more I opened myself up to love, the more I realized how powerful and transformative it could be. With each passing day, I felt lighter, as if the weight of my past was slowly lifting. Eventually, I decided to write a letter to my parents, pouring my heart onto the page. I wanted to convey my feelings about their favoritism, the emotional toll it had taken on me, and how their actions had shaped my identity. In my letter, I expressed gratitude for the moments that had taught me resilience, but I also addressed the pain that lingered. I shared my journey toward self-acceptance and my newfound sense of worth. While I understood that their favoritism was a part of their upbringing, I hoped they would reflect on the impact it had on me. After sending the letter, I braced myself for their response. When I finally heard from my parents, I was surprised by their willingness to engage in a conversation. My father acknowledged his mistakes, expressing regret for the favoritism that had driven a wedge between us. My mother, however, struggled to accept her role in our family dynamics. Despite the mixed reactions, I felt a sense of hope. I understood that healing takes time, and while our relationship may never return to what it once was, the conversation opened a door for change. I was ready to redefine my relationship with my family, setting boundaries that would protect my well-being while allowing space for growth. In reflecting on my journey, I recognized the importance of self-acceptance and the courage it takes to confront painful truths. I had learned to break free from the shackles of favoritism, reclaiming my identity and finding strength in my vulnerability. The lessons I gleaned from my experiences were invaluable. I discovered that healing often requires setting boundaries and choosing oneself over toxic relationships. While Alex's story became one of struggle and regret, it also served as a reminder of the importance of self-worth and resilience. In learning to embrace my worth and set boundaries, I discovered the true essence of love, one that comes from within. My story is a testament to the power of resilience, reminding others that they are deserving of love and acceptance, regardless of the dynamics of their families. As I embarked on this new chapter of my life, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I focused on my career, pursuing opportunities that aligned with my passions. I also continued to strengthen my friendships, nurturing relationships that brought joy and fulfillment. With Liam by my side, I embraced the beauty of vulnerability, sharing our dreams and supporting each other's journeys. Our bond deepened, and I found comfort in knowing that I was no longer alone. Looking ahead, I felt optimistic about the future. While the scars of favoritism would always be a part of my story, they no longer defined me. I was ready to write my narrative, filled with hope, love, and resilience. As the seasons changed, so did I. I learned to embrace the uncertainty of life, understanding that growth often arises from discomfort. My story was not solely about overcoming the pain of favoritism. It was also about embracing new beginnings. I began to explore new hobbies, expanding my horizons beyond the confines of my upbringing. I took up painting, using art as a form of expression. Each stroke of the brush became a release, allowing me to channel my emotions into something beautiful. In my quest for closure, I revisited the house my grandparents had left me. It had become a symbol of resilience and a place of healing. I transformed the space into a sanctuary, filling it with memories of my grandparents and the love they had given me. As I rearranged furniture and hung artwork, I felt a sense of peace envelop me. The house became a canvas for my healing journey, a reflection of my growth and transformation. Each room resonated with the love I had finally accepted from within. As I settled into my new life, I felt empowered to share my story with others. I began speaking at local support groups, encouraging individuals to embrace their identities and navigate the complexities of familial relationships. My journey became a source of inspiration, reminding others that they were not alone in their struggles. In sharing my experiences, I found healing not just for myself, but for those who resonated with my story. The connections I forged within these groups became a source of strength, reinforcing the idea that community is essential in the journey towards self-acceptance. As time passed, I found joy in the little moments, laughing with friends, creating art, and embracing my identity. I realized that healing is not linear. It ebbs and flows, intertwining with the beauty of life. My story evolved, becoming a tapestry of resilience and love. In the years that followed, I continued to cultivate meaningful relationships, appreciating the richness of diverse perspectives. I discovered the beauty of human connection, recognizing that family is not solely defined by blood, but by the love and support we share. In closing, my journey through the weight of favoritism has shaped me into the person I am today. I have learned the importance of self-acceptance, the power of vulnerability, and the strength it takes to break free from the chains of the past. The lessons embedded in my experiences have become my guiding light, reminding me that I am deserving of love and acceptance, regardless of my upbringing. As I continue to navigate life's challenges, I carry with me the knowledge that healing is possible and that I am capable of forging my own path. In sharing my story, I hope to inspire others to embrace their journeys, celebrate their identities, and cultivate the love they deserve. Life is a beautiful tapestry woven with moments of joy and pain, and it is in embracing both that we find our true selves. The journey may be long, but it is one worth taking. A journey toward resilience, self-love, and the unbreakable spirit that resides within us all.